all of us have two fundamental problems. These are our deepest needs, our deepest problems. And I don't know you, you don't know me, but I do know that this is the main problem with me and with you. The first one is pride. Our ego gets inflated. We think too much of ourselves. The other problem is misdirected love, that we take lesser goods and exalt them to the place that they're the greatest goods. And when that happens, we become idolaters. And we're all idolaters. And so if there was something I could give you that could help you with pride and misdirected love, wouldn't you be interested? I can give you something. The most powerful antidote I know of to combat pride and misdirected love, it's meditating on the cross. And what we're going to do in this hymn exercise is use what I think is the greatest hymn in the English language, When I Survey, and think about its message and the power, not of the hymn, but what the hymn is asking us to do, and that is to cast our mind on the cross in a particular way that results in pride shriveling and love being redirected. Now let me just read the opening stanza. You've probably sung this before. When I survey the wondrous cross on which the Prince of Glory died, my richest gain I count but loss and pour contempt on all my pride. Now that first line, when I survey the wondrous cross, a couple of words need to be talked about. One is that word wondrous. Isaac Watts, who wrote this hymn, he also wrote a book on the passions or the emotions of the human soul. And in that book, he talks about wonder. And what wonder is, it's when you see something that it stops you in your tracks because you just can't make sense of it. And there's something wondrous about the cross because, again, it stops us. It shows us something that doesn't fit in our pre-existing categories. Now, in order to be stopped in your tracks, though, notice that the hymn says, when I survey. So often the reason the cross doesn't have the power that it can have in our lives is we just take a casual glance at it. And what this hymn is telling us, that we actually have to survey, we have to have a sustained look at the cross for that wondrous power to grab hold of us. Now, what we see there is something that this stanza says will actually turn our heart inside out, such that what before was our richest gain, what we boasted in, is actually viewed as a spiritual liability. And our pride actually becomes something that we are convicted of. Now, how does this happen? Let me just read the next stanza. Forbid it, Lord, that I should boast, save in the death of Christ my God. All the vain things that charm me most, I sacrifice them to his blood. Again, there's a couple of words that we need to think about. One is that word charm, all the vain things that charm me most. The problem of sin is really being under a kind of spell. It affects our vision. If you think back to Eve, she looked at the forbidden fruit and it looked good. How on earth could something that would bring death look good to us? But isn't it the case with all of our sin? That the reason we're so deeply tempted is we look in something that actually produces death looks as if it's life-giving. And in terms of having victory over sin, the big question is, how does that spell get broken? Now, the way it gets broken, the hymn's reminding us, is by looking at the cross. And what happens when we see the cross, all of a sudden these vain things that used to have a magic power over us, suddenly we're willing to sacrifice them to his blood. That's a strange phrase. What the hymn writer's talking about is blood there is representative of something more, of the love that was shed or resulted in shed blood on the cross. And when you can see the love represented through the blood of Jesus, suddenly the things that before you were clinging to so tightly, you find yourself willing to sacrifice or give them up or give them back to God. Now, the way this really happens in terms of the mechanics of the heart, we see in the next two stanzas. See from his head, his hands, his feet, sorrow and love flow mingled down. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet, or thorns compose so rich a crown? Now, this is with the hymn. This is what makes this hymn so special. It's giving us a particular vista of the cross. And to get it, you need to imagine two people standing side by side, one who's an unbeliever who has no faith. The other person has the eyes of their heart open. They have faith. They can see what's really going on. Now, to the person who is an unbeliever, when they look at the cross, all they see is something grotesque. Who wants to see somebody suffering as a victim of injustice, literally suffocating and bleeding to death? It's a horrific image. And that's what it would look like if you just looked at Jesus from the eyes of unbelief as he's on the cross. But the eyes of faith see something else. Yes, they see all the horror of the suffering, but the suffering reveals something that is actually beautiful, that summons us out of ourself and love toward an object. And what we see is that in the tears, in the sweat, and the blood, that all of this is sacrificial love. Did e'er such love and sorrow meet? Or thorns compose so rich a crown, that here we have the majesty of God not being revealed with terror and with the fiercity of Sinai, with thunder and lightning, but we see it in an act of sacrifice, the Son of God giving himself for us. His majesty is the suffering he bears on our behalf, that we could be forgiven and brought into his family. The next stanza, this is the forgotten stanza of this hymn, makes a similar point. His dying crimson like a robe spreads o'er his body on the tree. Then I am dead to all the globe, and all the globe is dead to me. How do we die to the world? All of its false values, all of its seductive rituals. Well, the key is we actually, when we see Jesus and we recognize the love, his blood as it's coming down his body is pictured by the hymn writer as a robe, a royal robe, revealing his heart, his virtue, his majesty, his love for us. When we see that for what it is, suddenly we die to the world. The world seems cheap to us. We're willing to give it up in order to have something infinitely better. And that's where the hymn leads us. That last stanza, were the whole realm of nature mine, that were an offering far too small. Love so amazing, so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all. What happens if you stop to meditate on the cross? Remember, the power is not in the hymn. The power is what the hymn is trying to get us to do, which is to pause and survey the cross. When you survey the cross, first of all, your pride is deflated. And it's deflated because you recognize that you are the one who caused the death of God's Son because of your sin. So you've got nothing to boast in. So that huge problem of pride suddenly begins to be diminished. But equally, the love that was misdirected begins to be reoriented back to its true source in God himself. Because as we see the love that he's demonstrated toward us, what's the only way that we can respond but communion with that love by giving ourselves back to the one who first gave himself to us? So friends, you want to deal with your pride? You want to redirect your love? Meditate on the cross, and it'll do just that for you.